966.
This is the 966 episode 47. Mr. Richard Wilson, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing today? It looks sunny where you are.
I'm doing well. That's just the LED lighting directly in my face.
It's just
actually a little cloudy.
Your natural radiance. Here I am all in the gloom.
Well, it's not quite 46 degrees Celsius as Dr. Mark Thompson told us today he was sitting in. It's a little cooler than that here in the United States, which is good. Speaking of Dr. Mark Thompson, in a few minutes, we'll get to our awesome conversation with him and Dr. Neil Quilliam, who's Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. They've just written a new book called Governance and Domestic Policymaking in Saudi Arabia, Transforming Society, Economics, Politics, and Culture. It is awesome. It's going to hit Amazon in just about a week. It's available as a Kindle edition now, but just a great conversation coming up, Richard, with Mark and Neil.
I've been looking forward to this. We've had Dr. Thompson on, and it was awesome. And as I mentioned, Mark Thompson and Neil Quilliam are the Lennon and McCartney of socioeconomics for Saudi Arabia. They're breaking ground that nobody else has done, and just invaluable stuff.
Absolutely. Richard, we will be getting to some really interesting topics here coming up. We may or may not discuss all the things going on with Saudi Golf, the LIV Golf Tour.
We will.
And again, we'll get to that discussion with Mark and Neil in a second. But Richard, let's get going. What's your one big thing this week?
Let's get this out of the way so we can get to golf. So make our good friend Abdul Rahman happy. Vision 2030 shifts Saudi Arabia's global perception report. As part of its report, quote, KSA Reputation, How Vision 2030 is Rebranding the Nation, unquote, released last month, global media intelligence provider Karma, capital CARMA, conducted an in-depth analysis of coverage across 30 markets and over 1,800 major international titles, from traditional and digital media to identify prominent conversations and sentiments on Saudi Arabia. According to the study, there was a shift in sentiment between 2020 and 2021. Positive feelings increased by 9% from one year to the next, while negative coverage decreased by 18%. Of particular interest, Vision 2030 has become the largest single contributor to Saudi Arabia's global media coverage. General references to economic affairs were the second largest contributor to mainstream media articles during this period. And oil and gas were third at 14%. Tourism and culture came in at 9%. Karma concluded that sentiment coverage around Saudi Arabia has become more nuanced, particularly after COVID-19's impact has started to wind down and the kingdom has begun to promote its tourism credentials and economic attractiveness. The study showed that Saudi initiatives related to technology, environment, entertainment, sports, and science gained media traction in 2021. The share of these topics increased by 40%. Also, the study mentioned that in 2021, more international headlines underlined the achievements of Saudi women and the country's advancement of women's empowerment and inclusion. Rawan Hashim, Director of Content Insights for Karma International, told Al Arabiya English, quote, "We wanted to tell the story of this transformation and evaluate the shift in sentiment from 2020 to date while focusing on the key themes and reputation drivers from a comparative point of view," unquote. From a media analysis perspective, Hashim believes that Vision 2030 shows the world a new face of Saudi Arabia and has positively impacted media coverage of the kingdom.
This is a really interesting report and a very interesting publication. The same report also notes that emphasis on oil will keep its share of media coverage. The same applies to the strategic importance of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, as well as its ties with the USA. I think, Richard, this is a great one big thing this week, because you and I, obviously we do this literally every day, not even weekend days off. We're immersed in the news and media coverage of Saudi Arabia all the time. And so we sort of have a really unique opportunity to gauge it over time, not just over weeks or months, but over years. It's really hard to actually put into words and actually accurately describe how it has changed. And I think this study gets going on that. Vision 2030 obviously changed a lot of things about Saudi Arabia actually changing, but it also has changed the way that the world sees Saudi Arabia. And, as we've discussed, a lot of skeptics of Vision 2030 say, well, I don't really buy it, but at least they're talking about Vision 2030 and how Saudi Arabia is at least trying to change itself.
I think that captures it well. I think that's a good point, because we do see it at a granular level, but we also have a sense of ebb and flow as vocabulary changes and perceptions change. And I think the key word here is traction. As you say, we talk about Vision 2030, and we're aware of real change within the kingdom, and the lack of an understanding of this change outside of the kingdom. Clearly, as this Karma report shows, it is getting some traction, and it is changing some reporting. We don't know if it's changing minds, but its reporting is evolving a bit, which is good news for Saudi Arabia. It's what they're after. One of the interesting things, and this is something we comment on, is they did this. They call it sentiment evolution. So this is a sentiment evolution study, and it extended into the first quarter of this year, and it tipped some. It reduced increased some of the negatives. And why? Because geopolitical factors, specifically factors in the war in Ukraine and energy, came to the forefront of the international attention. And this is something we always talk about. Saudi Arabia is much better if they're off the front pages. It's very hard for Saudi Arabia to get off the front pages, but if they were left to do their work and do Vision 2030 and not have a lot of ruckus or instability in global international markets, these positive numbers would be even higher.
Absolutely. There is the standard. I mean, it's interesting how American journalism works, Western journalism works. There's always a standard canned couple of paragraphs that are included about Saudi Arabia. It's something we've mentioned before. It's usually now a reference to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. But in the past, it was ties to 9/11. It was, problems with Saudi Arabia's education system. Those standard paragraphs do change, but those are very slow to change. And that's what Americans and those in the West are hit with over and over again. There's a new Saudi story. The Saudi story is the headline, but then you get to, why are we talking about Saudi Arabia? Well, something you may have heard about Saudi Arabia recently is this. And, there's always just going to be that for Saudi Arabia. And, it's something that Saudi Arabia, I think, is working to change. And it's correcting it's a course turn in a boat. It just takes forever. You just have to be patient with it. So this is interesting, this study, and we'll include a link to this on our website, the 966podcast.com, and it's already on our Saudi US Trade Group website, sustg.com. Just really, really good.
Indeed, and you're one big thing.
Well, so it's interesting because we were talking about sort of American perceptions of Saudi Arabia and how that's shaped through the media. And Richard, as they say in the radio business, you just play the hits. We're talking about golf now, LIV Golf, because it really is a high exposure point between Saudi Arabia and the broader American public. Most people don't follow the subject that we cover on this podcast, Richard, the 966 podcast. Like a vast majority of people don't follow Saudi Arabia closely as a country. We're doing that so we make it easy for you to get caught up and stay up to date. But the point is that with this whole LIV Golf tour, the word Saudi is in front of a much larger population of Americans right now. And in this case, it's the entire golf world. And the entire golf world has been turned upside down by this new LIV Golf tour. The money behind it is, of course, from Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. So, and Richard, we've been following this closely. Some, including our friend Abdul Rahman and many of our other listeners, may say too closely. We've been following this new Saudi golf tour from its inception, really late last year. So what's happening right now is, let's start first with sort of what's happening, the news, the facts. Several golfers have joined the LIV Golf Tour, have decided to resign from the PGA. Some of those golfers are actually, in fact, the top names in the sport. Bryson DeChambeau, the 2020 U.S. Open champion, is rumored to be joining the LIV Golf Tour. Patrick Reed, the 2018 Masters champion. You've got Dustin Johnson, who was just 2 years ago the number one golfer in the world. Phil Mickelson, of course. Way more than we thought when we last discussed this. We thought maybe that they would get one or two names, but it would be sort of an upstart tour without any of the PGA names. But just in the last week, really a handful, maybe 15 or so of the top 100 golfers joined the LIV Golf Tour. And that's more than I think either of us thought. But what we're looking at now is really a your move moment for the PGA Tour after this happened. And I think we just saw that move with the PGA Tour sending a letter out to players basically saying that if you play in this new tour, you will be booted off the PGA Tour. And so I guess I want to make this one big thing because I love talking about this story. It's very interesting. It's all come to a head right now. And I also think that the PGA Tour is really in a spot of bother here. It's long put profits over players. They made changes recently as the LIV Golf story began to rise, but players are leaving for several reasons, one of which, of course, is money. But there's also a lot of dissatisfaction with the PGA. The PGA is the organization that issued an ultimatum to players saying that if they couldn't play anywhere else, even for guest appearances, that rubbed players the wrong way. They are not employees of the PGA. They're actually more like general contractors. So that was sort of part of the strategy, Richard, that we've discussed that the PGA had to sort of destroy LIV Golf before it ever took off. I think it may have backfired. Either way, what's next? Most upstart sporting leagues in any sport fail, not because of lack of interest, but lack of money. Saudi Arabia's public investment fund happens to be deep pocketed, definitely enough to get this league up and running. And if the critique against it is that LIV Golf has only a handful of stars, most of them are getting on in their careers. The missing piece is the next generation of young stars. If you're a young golfer that's about to turn pro, LIV Golf is an attractive option for you. This is big money, bigger than you'll get on the PGA Tour. You got a really good chance of winning. You're going to get paid either way just for showing up. The last place player in the LIV Golf Tour teeing off right now, or I guess about 20 minutes ago, the first shot of the LIV Golf Tour in London just teed off. The last place player in that tournament gets $120,000.
That would be you and me.
If you're, yeah, well, one of us has to get the second to last if it's both of us. So I like that. I don't know what second to last gets, but anyway, a lot going on right now. And I want to make this point because we do talk about this and it's been all rumor mill until this moment. But now here we are. We've got the LIV Golf Tour just teed off. We've got a handful of players and not just any other names. I mean, these are some of the best names in the game joining LIV Golf. And we also have the word Saudi in front of Americans right now. And this is why it's important to us because a lot of Americans don't focus in on this and they just hear the name Saudi. It's a great way to see what the reactions are to Saudi Arabia. It's a real look.
There's a lot there. That's good, Lucian. I want to dig deeply on this though, on one of the key things you said, which was spot of bother. It sounds like you're reading the kids a lot of Winnie the Pooh.
Christopher
Robbins.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the reference that comes to mind almost immediately when you say spot of bother is Winnie the Pooh.
They're in London now, so I figured I'd British it up just a little bit.
My take on this is I'm just glad it's underway and the speculation's over. Let's get to it, see what happens. I think there's a reason the PGA is upset. And I think the reason the PGA is upset is because of all of its sponsors at these events that are in real peril at the moment. Let's remember the PGA does not control the major championships. So the US Open, the British Open, the PGA, the Masters, that's all their own gig. PGA has nothing to do with that. If those majors want to invite these players, they can. So the PGA is responsible for all the other tournaments of which they derive millions and millions of dollars for sponsors. And these are the ones that are in peril. And I would say they're in real peril. And there's several reasons for this. Number one is, every tournament, and I'll go through them, every pot is going to be $25 million. So that's $4 million to the winner. As you say, there's no cut. Player who finishes last will take home $120,000. So by comparison, the winner of the PGA Tour's flagship event this year, the Players Championship, Cameron Smith earned $3.6 million for his victory in March. Colin Morikawa won $2 million for his Open Championship in 2021. So this is for a regular tournament. The winner gets $4 million. Last place player, last entrant gets $120,000. There's $5 million split between the top three in the team competition. Now there's a new format here, and there's going to be team play. There's only 48 players, only 54 holes, shotgun start, a lot of new stuff. And there's at the end of the year, there's another 50 million for the team championship. So again, this is a real threat to the regular tour. And there's a couple of things that roll into this and why it's really a threat. LIV Golf has already announced its 2023-2025 schedule. LIV Golf is funded enough and has the intent to be around. So if you commit to LIV Golf, this isn't as if it's going to fold tomorrow or next year. This isn't 8 tournaments this year. Mm-hmm. This is potentially an ongoing existence where you can earn a boatload of money and have a livelihood. But here's the thing, the other thing, Royal, they'll say, all right, here it's competing right this week with the Royal Bank of Canada's tournament. And they're saying, oh, the field is much stronger than the RBC. It is. I mean, there's 17 PGA players at competing in a LIV tournament. But this is the first outing. This is the first go round. Mm-hmm. And one of the really concerning things that has to be for the PGA is that committing to the LIV tournament is James Piot, or P-I-O-T, 23 years old, Michigan State golfer, who is the reigning U.S. amateur champion. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking, James Piot, you're going, okay, I could try and play the Hooters Tour, then try and qualify, and maybe this, maybe that, scrapping this, or I can go over to, LIV and do this tournament. If I play really well, I might make $600,000.
More money that you might make, in your entire career on the PGA Tour if you don't really win one there. I think that's just such a great point. There's also a 16-year-old or 15-year-old actually competing for one of these teams as well in the LIV Golf Tour, which is interesting.
Yeah. So, the PGA is right to be worried.
I thought that their letter, and all of this just came out as we started recording our interview this morning, but the PGA's letter was really interesting, and I think strategically it wasn't a mistake. I mean, invoking Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Tiger Woods. I mean, Jack Nicklaus had to work really hard in retirement because he never really made a lot of money on tour. Jack and Arnie did televised exhibitions outside of the tour that paid for, paid more than, any event that they made in their career. Invoking Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is the original upstart threat to the PGA Tour. He threatened to start his own tour in 2006 if purses didn't increase, which led to the FedEx Cup. I think that the PGA saying you can't, if you play in the LIV Golf Tour, you can't play in our own tournaments. I think it's now way tougher for them to say that now because all the momentum is behind the LIV Golf Tour, and the only way that they can really survive, in my opinion, not survive, but to really stay competitive, is to brand themselves as the premier golf league where there's where all the best golfers in the world are playing, and winning PGA tournaments means you're the best golfer, because right now they're not going to be able to come up with the type of money that the LIV Golf Tour has. And also the LIV Golf Tour, I mean, this is a lot of money. It's got as much as $2 billion behind it. It's really just got the weight of the Saudi Public Investment Fund behind it. But if you think about it, baseball players, pitchers can make as much as a couple $100 million each. This actually puts professional golfers up on that level now, with Dustin Johnson rumored to get $100 million just to play. They offered Tiger 9 figures as well. But Richard, I mean, this is my one big thing, because this has really come to a head in the last week, and you and I have been texting about it a little bit. It's been kind of wild to see, and it's all happening.
Well, that's why I like the talks all over. Let's get it on. and it'll unfold like it unfolds, but this is a serious challenge, and so it's nice not to be talking about it or speculating about it, and because that was a disaster. Let's see what happens and go from here, and it'll unfold one way or another. The PGA has a reputational advantage. I mean, if you want to worry about record books or qualifying for the Ryder Cup or this or that, you're going to stay there. If you have other concerns, LIV Golf, especially since they have the means and the commitment, and they're going to be around for a while, it's pretty attractive.
Indeed. And I just love the connection between our one big things this week, because we were talking about, I mean, you just made the point that it's kind of always best for Saudi to remain off the front pages, and just impossible with this storyline. But you do get that good gauge of what people are saying and thinking. And really just, it's been so fun to go through all of the Golf Digest and various social media posts and just getting into the comment section and just getting an unfiltered attitude of what people are saying and thinking about this new golf tour, about Saudi Arabia. There are a lot of people that don't have a negative attitude about it. A lot of people applauding the players for taking the money and creating something new. So just really interesting. Okay, Abdurrahman, we're done with the golf talk now. There's no more golf.
You can
probably won't come back.
You can turn up. You can take it off mute now.
Richard, let's jump right into our really awesome discussion with Mark and Neil about their new book. Mark, as you mentioned, is a repeat offender, repeat guest with us. Just a great discussion, attitudes in Saudi Arabia and governance and policymaking. It's just awesome.
Really enlightening. This is great.
We are pleased to be speaking now with Dr. Mark Thompson, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Socioeconomics Program at the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, and Dr. Neil Quilliam, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House. Mark and Neil are authors of the newly published book, Governance and Domestic Policy Making in Saudi Arabia, Transforming Society, Economics, Politics, and Culture. Through case studies, the book examines Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and National Transformation Plan, but shifts the focus from successes and failures to instead evaluate the actual processes of domestic policy making and governance that are being mapped out to achieve them. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the 966 today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
We are delighted you're with us. We've been anxiously awaiting this. Mark, you now entered the hallowed halls of the Repeat 90, the 966 guest. Neil, welcome. We're delighted you could join us today from the UK. I wanted to, before we jump into the book, which is fascinating, and we're excited about that, and really glad to have the opportunity to talk about it with you two today. I wanted to congratulate you, Mark, on recently entering Islam. And again, we were laughing beforehand. You just did your first Umrah, and you came back with the Hajj flu.
Yes, that's correct, which I think is part of the process. I think that you have to do that.
Just any comments on the experience? It must have been extraordinary.
Actually, funny enough, obviously a lot of people have been asking me about what it was like to go on Umrah for the first time, to go to Mecca for the first time. And the word that I've used, the most is actually extraordinary. It's very difficult to put the experience into words because it's unlike anything that I have ever experienced in my life anywhere. It's a completely unique experience in every way. And it's simultaneously a very individual experience spiritually, and yet collective as well, because you're part of this huge international group of people from all over the world, and it was obviously there were considerable numbers of people when I was there, because obviously it's between between the last Eid and Hajj coming up fairly soon. Yes, it's extraordinary and it's remarkable, and I think regardless of whether if anybody experiences this, I think regardless of whether you're a spiritual person, religious person or not, I think it would be almost impossible not to be actually moved by this incredibly unique experience. It's very difficult to put into words, but it's I'm still processing it actually.
I was born and raised Christian. I'm envious. I would love to feel that.
Yes,
it must have been extraordinary, as you say.
It is extraordinary, and the traditions, the Islamic history, everything is run so deep and is so powerful as well, I think. And as I said, it's very difficult not to be moved by this and not to be sort of to feel that you're part of this. It really is an extraordinary experience. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Let's turn to this book. And before we turn to this book, I think our listeners and viewers should know that Dr. Mark Thompson and Dr. Neil Quilliam are really, in essence, the Lennon and McCartney of Saudi Arabia socioeconomics. They've sort of established it and set a level of expertise that will be unparalleled, just as in that songwriting duo. But you've been working together since 2014. You've done authored previous books, one on policymaking in the GCC, one on Saudi youth. I guess you got one coming out on Saudi Arabia soft power. Is that correct?
Neil?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do. We're working on that currently, and we will be holding a workshop in Cambridge in July, and hopefully the outcome of that workshop will be another book. I'm not quite sure who's Lennon and McCartney in this duo, but I rather like that idea. But yeah, we've been working together, as you say, since 2014. And I think we've sort of, we found a very good way of working together, a very good rhythm. Mark, being based in the Kingdom, and me sort of being in London and moving back and forth. And I mean, something that Mark has really brought, and I think that's really important to sort of scholarship and research of the region, is he's had this sort of privileged position where he's taught so many young Saudis over the years, and he's got sort of access points, if you like, that academics such as myself or policy people like myself who sit outside the kingdom just simply don't have. So that sort of bridge between the two has been very strong, and I think that's enabled us to sort of draw on different strengths, which has ultimately resulted in these series of edited books. And you would see throughout the progression of the projects that we've worked on, increasing numbers of young Saudi voices coming through that. And I think that's very important, to the field of scholarship itself.
Well, nobody else is doing this level of work or this range of work, and it's invaluable, especially at this juncture when we're seeing such transformation in Saudi Arabia. So Lucian gave a great intro. So governance and domestic policymaking in Saudi Arabia transforms society, economics, politics, and culture. I didn't realize the publication date was supposed to be June 16th, but I went on to Amazon and I realized I could download this on Kindle. I just discovered this earlier this week. So it's available for all you viewers on Kindle, and I don't know, in hardback and softcover. I will say this: it's also not badly priced. I mean, so many of these are just extraordinarily expensive, but it's quite reasonable. So just so anybody's thinking of getting the book, I think the Kindle I downloaded was $17.
Yes, I think the ebook is probably the easiest way to do this, and I think obviously now. In the past, a lot of these books were initially published as a hardback, they were extremely expensive, because they were really targeted at university libraries and things like that, which of course, cut out, and they would then publish a paperback version of it, but not really to sort of like 2 years down the track or something. But fortunately, in the last couple of years, we've seen the sort of simultaneous publications now in the hardback, the soft copy, and most importantly, the ebooks, and they're all available. And as you say, they're very reasonably priced.
Yes. So I encourage you. So I'm going to quote yourselves back to you as our start, just so you can give us a context of what you were thinking when you put this book together. Quote, Lennon and McCartney, quote, "This edited volume aims to go far beyond the headlines and succinct stories that often describe the success or failure to date of Saudi Vision 2030 and the NTP 2020, National Transformation Program 2020. Much of the literature, analysis, and reportage on Saudi Arabia usually highlight areas of, quote, high politics, unquote, such as foreign policy and the succession, while disregarding the less glamorous area of low politics.
Mm-hmm.
Yet young people are the key to Saudi Arabia's future prosperity, and this necessitates studying the issues, many in the area of, quote, low politics, unquote, that they believe are important, such as employment, housing, healthcare, and the rising cost of living." Can you expand on what you mean by low politics?
Well, I mean, I use this quite a lot when I'm sort of giving lectures or teaching, what have you, and the difference between sort of high politics and low politics. Meaning, the high politics are the sort of the foreign policy, the succession, the security, the sort of, if you like, as you said, the glamorous issues, the ones that tend to get the most attention, the ones that grab the headlines, the ones that very often, you find quite a lot of people working on because of that. Whereas the low political issues are the bread and butter issues, the nitty gritty, the things that actually affect everybody's lives. Professor Tim Niblock, who very kindly reviewed this manuscript when it was first submitted, and who provided an endorsement for the book, which is actually on the back cover. I mean, I think he hits the nail on the head when he says that, the book provides a quite different level of inquiry from that of most other works. Its focus is not on the big economic and strategic issues facing the kingdom, but on the processes and problems of policy making on everyday matters. And then to stress what he says here, for most Saudis, it is at this level that they experience most directly the impact of government policy, whether positively or negatively. And I think that really hits, that really sums it up. It's looking at how does this actually affect people's everyday lives? Because when you are in the majlis, when you are in the diwania, when you are in the istiraha, whatever, the coffee shop, and you are talking to people, and you are talking about their concerns, their aspirations, they very rarely say, what really concerns me is sort of foreign policy vis-a-vis whatever, unless it's something that's very topical, or there's just been a video on TikTok or something. But, in general, the things that people talk about, like they talk about everywhere in the world, are the things that impact their lives. And that's no different from the States, from Great Britain, wherever.
Yeah, I mean, I think traditionally, we would get excited about succession, or we get excited about security, as Mark's kind of alluded to, all those foreign policy issues. But I think the kingdom previously didn't really open itself up sufficiently for sort of academics or researchers to go into the country to sort of lift the bonnet or the hood of the car and look at the inside. And I think there has there's clearly been a big change in the kingdom over the past 10 years effectively. And I think researchers can now actually get on the ground and start to look at those sort of those daily issues, the daily issues of governance. What's it like to sort of run up against the bureaucracy? And I think as external researchers, we could never really consider that. We would go in, we would meet the same set of individuals in the kingdom. There would be maybe 20 people that you would go and talk to, and you'd say, okay, so what does the succession look like? And you'd come up with the same sets of questions, and you came away with the same set of answers. So that's where a kind of echo chamber would come. Whereas now, we're able to kind of penetrate the kingdom in a way that was never, we were never able to in the past. So you can really understand where those issues are, sort of in the cultural space, in the religious space, with entrepreneurs, wherever it may be, and basically sort of look at some of the issues that are just every day. And I think that's very much what we've been trying to do. But the environment has shifted so much so that we're able to do that.
So, I mean, if you think of the time. If you think of the guests that you've had on, this podcast over the last few months, and the type of topics that they've been discussing and the issues that they've been talking about, I mean, again, there's a lot of topics and issues here that, as Neil said, maybe previously 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, maybe just wouldn't have come up because the landscape, the environment was so very different.
And that's a good point. And I've been delighted that almost everyone we've asked to be on the show has said yes. And if they didn't say yes, it was largely because of other constraints, and which prevail here in the U.S. So, for example, government officials, they're reluctant or have to get clearance. Same thing here. I'd love to have the new ambassador to Saudi Arabia join us, but he's not going to be able to until he's confirmed, and so on and so forth. It's a different deal. But you're exactly right. So what you're saying, so there's a sea change essentially from when you published your first book in 2014 to now. And now, so you're saying you not only do you have access to sort of designated interlocutors, which is how Saudi Arabia has worked in for many years. You know, you had a set of group, as you say, Neil, of folks you went and talked to, and they were okay. You know, government was okay. Now you have access, unfettered. I won't say unfettered, but you have sufficient access to youth, entrepreneurs, women, clerics. Is that correct?
Yes. I've always had a lot of access because of, you know, my various positions here. But I suppose it's, you know, ease of access has changed, of course. You know, when I wrote my first book back in sort of 2012, 13, you know, I was able to interview like 120 people. A lot of them were not the usual sorts of people that were on the interview circuit, as it were. But of course, it was, you know, it was a little bit more difficult then for doing some of these interviews for very obvious reasons. So that sort of ease of access has changed. And just as Neil said, you know, the ease of coming to the kingdom has changed. You know, the bureaucracy has lessened, you know, whether it's for business, for tourism, you know, the fact that you can travel so much more easily around the kingdom today. And all of this is sort of, you know, it's all sort of happened together, and attitudes as well, and the desire to engage, and people wanting to explain, wanting to talk to you, and wanting to explain to you about, you know, what they're doing in their particular sector, or what they're hoping to do, or, you know, obstacles they're facing, or creating new sectors, creating new opportunities. So there's also this desire to sort of to engage and to sort of to talk about this. And I think, you know, we also have to remember that, you know, we're benefiting now. I think we mentioned this in the last time we spoke. We're also benefiting from, you know, the scholarship program, from the massive expenditure on education and all of this. I mean, all of those seeds were all sown, and now the benefits are being reaped.
Well, it was interesting. We featured in our Sustig Review, our daily newsletter on Saudi Arabia, a recent study by a group called Karma, CARMA, who do media. They study media patterns, and they discovered that from 2020 to 2021, Saudi Arabia, in fact, has made some significant headway in terms of its public relations, and the Vision 2030 message. You know, it has come to the fore in terms of how people view Saudi Arabia. But let's talk about Vision 2030. This is really since 2016, it's really been the organizing idea for Saudi Arabia, both governmentally and increasingly for society. You know, the sort of the benchmark is Vision 2030. I mean, it to a lesser level because it's more implementation, the NTP 2020. But David Jones in his piece, Kingmakers and Knaves, he's talking about consultants, and he makes the point that many countries, Saudi Arabia on occasion itself, make a mistake of conflating strategy with policy. And I think this is sort of what you guys are trying to get to. There's the strategy, but there's also the on-the-ground policy. Are those two running in sync, or where do you see, in terms of the Vision 2030 vision, where do you see some discrepancies from actual facts on the ground?
I think, you know, the strategy, the direction of travel is clear as to, you know, where the vision's tending and where the country's heading. There is a gap. There is a difference in terms of policy. And I think that's just simply because, you know, this is a huge transformation that's taking place, and a big transition of society as well. And no matter how hard you will it, it's just not going to happen overnight. I mean, you know, the foundations, the planks really have to be put in place. And I think what we've seen, you know, throughout the book, and also just through our own engagements, is, you know, capacity is being built. You know, the capacity, you can't just turn a switch, and the capacity is there overnight, that you can build a policy and then you can put, you know, processes in place. I mean, to a large extent, what we've seen is the sort of the slow consensus that used to govern the kingdom has kind of been, put on hold or certainly suspended. And in its place, you've got these relatively new institutions that are being created. And you have, individuals who are put in at the top who are given the authority to sort of, circumvent the bureaucracy, which would have frustrated processes in the past. So you can push ahead to get things done quite quickly. But what isn't really in place then are the sort of, policies, procedures, and processes to make sure things are fully enacted, if that makes sense. So you can blast through the roadblocks. You could say, I want this to happen. This is going to happen in 2 days' time. Everyone mobilizes around that and makes it happen. But where's the sustainability? And that's what's still being built and put in place. So I'd say that, that's the difference between strategy and getting the policy really into play. You can make things happen quickly, but if the challenge is that you can't really do it over a sustained period until you build the capacity. And when we're talking about Saudi youth, I think, they themselves are going through that process of building and developing, their own capacity, and they need to gain their own experience in order to make things work.
Absolutely. And if you, as Neil just said, so if you decide that you want to create a new university, for example, and there are numerous projects for new universities, which I'm sure you've heard about, but you can build the infrastructure, you can create a physical university, but a university is not actually about the buildings. It's about the people. It's about the research. It's about the publications. It's about everything that goes with that. And that takes time. You can't just sort of build, that you can't just sort of go boom and that's it. This takes time to build, and it's the individuals, the capacity, it's something that, maybe in 10 years, maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years. And I think, that's something that has to sort of happen organically.
In everything we talk about on the 966, there's an X factor. And by that, I mean, we frequently talk about the Vision 2030 aspirations. We frequently talk about, progress in tourism across any number of sectors and this and that, energy, the whole spectrum. Mark, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, we cover an extraordinary range of topics. The X factor is exactly what you're talking about, capacity. And, we can say what capacity means. Is that education? Is that training? It's all of these, I assume.
Yeah.
And you can't snap your fingers and make that happen.
No.
And I assume this is what you're talking about.
Yes, I mean, a lot of this is experience, isn't it? I mean, you gain experience by when you have a predominantly young population who have, because of the scholarship program and because of the money spent on education, whatever, who have been feeding into the system, which they are now. And it's enormous change, as you know. But at the same time, they still have to gain that sort of experience. I mean, it doesn't come overnight. I mean, the person you are in terms of your professional life at 30 and the person you are at 50 are two completely different people, as we know, because of that. You have to gain this.
So you may not be able to speak to this if this is in fact the X factor, but and I'll ask you to maybe you have great expertise on this, and maybe I'm asking you to step outside of your comfort zone. But one of the chapters is young people and vocational education choices in Saudi Arabia, implications for aligning policy with aspirations. This is Hannah Al-Mubayad, who is in your shop, which, by the way, so the King Faisal Foundation, an extraordinary institution, and also the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, which you two are affiliated with, as well as Hannah. But also there's an Al Faisal University. But so the question is this: the educational approach is changing in many ways. So, for example, the Abdullah Scholarships, which was started in 2005 and is now the custodian of the Two Holy Mosques Scholarship Program, which has had, as you have mentioned, Mark, an extraordinary impact on Saudi society. It's been revised and refined, so it's a little smaller, much more targeted. But also, are there not significant initiatives at the vocational training level as well? And I guess the question is that education universe, that capacity building universe that leads to a result where Saudi Arabia has the educated, skilled up Saudis available to do what they want to do to transform their economy. Is that being put in place? Is it moving along?
I mean, yes. I mean, this is a work in progress. I mean, maybe we could have Hannah with us next time, because she's the complete expert.
As I said, I may be asking you to step outside, but
no, it's fine. No. I mean, yes. I mean, this is something that is a work in progress. It is something that's happening. I mean, educational reform is always, is always contentious, and it's not just in the kingdom, in various other places. And educational reform has been discussed ever since I first arrived in the kingdom. I think one of the issues that we see with educational reform, in not just in Saudi Arabia, but certainly within the region, and in fact we had a webinar about a month or so ago about this with Hannah, actually, who was involved, and some other regional experts, talking about problems related to the educational reform. And I think one of the biggest problems that we find, and again, I think this is universal, is that a great many of the people who are involved in educational reform and who draft policy and who look at, draft the documents and things like this, have actually never actually been in the classroom. Have never actually taught, have never actually experienced what it's actually like. And that actually the teachers and the people like this are not consulted, or even the students very often. This is, as I say, I don't think this is just a problem related to Saudi Arabia. Teacher training, of course, is also another huge issue, in terms of, it's all very well, saying we're going to teach critical thinking, we're going to teach philosophy, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But if you don't, because again, it goes back to capacity. If we don't actually have the people who are skilled and qualified to actually do this, then it's not going to happen. So it's one thing to sort of look at, sort of drafting policies, and then quite another thing sometimes at sort of implementing them. I think as well, in terms of educational reform and sort of reforming, the curricula and things like this, yes, we see this happening, and we see that there's now more awareness, I would say, of the demands of the labour market. Although I think sometimes there's still too much of an issue of sort of trying to sort of fit young people, if you like, into certain sort of boxes, as it were, rather than actually educating them and sort of giving them the choices and what have you. And of course, there's also the issue as well, is that if you have, again, these are all universal issues. If you actually have, educational policies that are only sort of thinking about sort of the jobs of today, for example, rather than actually what the labour market is going to look like in 20 years' time, which I think is also something that is extremely important and, again, is universal. Neil, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I would just really add, I think, I think, again, it's probably universal, but I think vocational training programs tend to lag behind.
Yes.
The required skills are almost always, a good half a decade behind that. So that's something to take into account. But I mean, we are really talking about sort of, cross-generational change here, I think. I mean, it's, children just joining schools today are going to have to go through this process. So it's not something that you can switch overnight. But, we were speaking to Hannah yesterday, and, she was also reflecting on, attitudes of families, expectations that the families will have on their children. It's good to be a doctor or an engineer, or whatever, and that, again, that happens in every country and every society, but where you've got a high focus on that, or a concentration on that, it's probably a less sort of efficacious path, or considered to be a less efficacious path, to go to vocational training college, to go and work in a very different field, or to go and work in tourism. I mean, so this whole sort of change of mindset has to take place. So it doesn't just sort of sit in the classroom, or on a vocational training classroom. It's got to happen in society as well. with, you know, with your peers, with your siblings, with your parents and grandparents. So that's quite a long journey.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, that journey is happening. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the change in mentalities, the change in mindsets has been, I think, very positive, and has happened in a relatively short space of time in terms of, you know, the types of jobs that young Saudis are now prepared to do, the types of choices that they've got. I think in the past, you know, one of the big problems was, you know, as Neil said, you know, if you were a young man, you know, it was either sort of you go into the military, or it's engineer or medicine, and that was really about it. But I mean, and I think, you know, a lot of young people simply were not aware of any other choices. It wasn't just that those were the only things available. They didn't actually know that anything else was available a lot of the time. Whereas now we see, because of the creation of new sectors, because we see, you know, there's so much more awareness individually amongst young people about what they can or can't do, what they're interested in. And this is, you know, we see this changing very, very quickly. The attitudes to part-time jobs, attitudes to volunteering. I mean, all of this has happened, you know, in the space of really a couple of years. I mean, I was in Taif just before I went to Makkah last week, and was amazed by the changes that I saw there, and huge sort of new sort of shopping malls come sort of recreation sort of spaces that had opened there very recently in the last couple of months, and all these coffee shops being run by young Saudis with Saudi waiters and Saudi waitresses, and they're all incredibly proud of their coffee shops, and, you know, all sparkling new and everything like this. And it was great. It was lovely. It was really, really nice. Very positive.
Just one other thing, if I could just jump in, Mark. During my last visit to the kingdom, you and I were talking with, you know, some of your former students about the importance of, you know, career advice. I mean, that doesn't really exist, I don't think, at the moment, and that's an area that's really lacking, and the function or the role of mentorship as well. Yes. This seems to be something that young Saudis seem to be crying out for, and I think those are important facets that would help part of this transition. Yeah,
I mean, Hannah and I, obviously, we work together. As you said, Richard, correctly, Hannah is at the King Faisal Centre as well, and we work together on various projects related to this. And we published something on good jobs, bad jobs not long ago. We're actually working on a paper at the moment about changing attitudes to certification, attitudes, you know, young Saudis' preferences or not of professional certification over academic certification. But all of this is part of that transition, and all of this is part of that change. But, you know, we have identified, you know, very much the fact this lack of career guidance at a very early, you know, and we're not talking career guidance at tertiary level, you know, when they're sort of senior students and they're just about to go out and enter the labour market, because way too late then. And a lot of them would have already done, you know, their internships or their co-ops, their summer training and what have you. But really, sort of the type of maybe career guidance that you get in other countries, which is sort of, you know, introduced at secondary school, for example, career fairs, job fairs and things. I mean, I remember going to one when I was 15, I think, you know, which was, you know, a few years ago now, but you know, 5 years ago, but yeah, no, but that is, and I think that's also very important, because that goes back to, you know, you've got the vision creating these new sectors, and, you know, the new types of jobs, and you need to create awareness of that as well. You need to create awareness that there are these, not just jobs, but there are actually these careers that maybe a lot of young people just simply never heard of.
I think that's fascinating to hear you talk about it as part of your research and what you've seen. I mean, there was a time the gold standard was a job at Saudi Aramco. Increasingly, you know, there are more options, but again, we're talking about, you know, if you want to work in tourism, PIF or this sort of thing. But again, that's sort of the top level educated folks.
Yes.
Who have maybe had a chance to study abroad or gotten further education. You know, the majority of others need to be, you know, find, you know, fulfilling, rewarding jobs that they can get because they've earned, skills. And that's, as we talked about, that's the process. It's, as you say, Neil, is generational and unavoidably generational.
Yeah, and that's the process that also, you need to start changing mindsets. You need to show people that actually, that you can have a very rewarding and lucrative career, as an electrician or as a plumber or as a builder or what have you. I mean, this is something that this is in the process of changing.
Interesting. One of the Dave DeRoche, friend of ours, and is also a fellow member of the returnee 966 returnee. Yes.
And who has a chapter in the book, of course.
And has a chapter in the book. And I look forward to reading it. It's building defense capacity in King Salman and Saudi Arabia. So it's one of, by the way, so for listeners, it's one of 10 chapters in the book, and we could run through it, but they're all fascinating and they all take a sector. And so I'll be really interested to get through it. But Dave has commented, I think more than once on our show, is that when you say, if you're looking at let's say a Lucid manufacturing plant at King Abdullah Economic City, which is coming, you have to have craftsmen. You have to have people who, and you can't just have engineers. You have to have people who are skilled metal benders or any number of things. And these things you just don't conjure out of midair.
No, we have to train people.
Right.
So, it's fascinating how, whenever you have these discussions about all of this, I mean, how, nearly always it goes back to education, of some sort.
The X factor. Yeah.
Yes. The X factor, education. Yes.
Fascinating. So, Lucian, I'm gonna get to some big ideas that they mention in the introduction to the book. Is there anything you wanted to add on this?
No, that's good. Let's do it.
So big idea. So first of all, I don't want to not emphasize enough what you both of you have just said. That X factor of education underpins everything that Saudi Arabia wants to achieve. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. It really is. Yeah.
And it's something that we on the 966 like to look at because, Saudi Arabia does very well with the grand announcement and has no shortage of aspiration in terms of its vision, which we applaud. But, the generational need to build capacity is first and foremost, has to be first and foremost for them. So this is, I'm gonna run through these things, 3 things that you said in this, and I think they're interesting, and if you can address them. Unveiling Saudi Vision 2030 in April 2016, had 3 indirect consequences. First, they raised expectations to an unrealistic degree among Saudi Arabia's predominantly young population, whose views and aspirations frequently outpace the government's programs to influence and shape societal and national development. How about we take these one at a time? So I gather what I hear is that this idea, the informing idea of Vision 2030, the reforms in terms of social reforms, the opening up society for youth, has inspired and encouraged and incented them to really think. Are they getting, are their expectations raised to an unrealistic degree?
I think that was, obviously at the time that was the concern, because it was so, this was something so unprecedented in the fact that you had a leader talking to, sort of a young leader talking to young people on television, talking about things that they were concerned about. And that was really not something that had ever really happened before. I was sitting with young people watching it. You could see their reactions to this. I mean, it was as though, he opened that door that they'd all been sort of pushing at for a long time, and they all collectively got up and went through it.
They didn't need to be. They didn't need to be invited again.
No, they did not. Because I think what you have to remember is that Saudi Vision 2030 was in very many ways a response to what was already happening. Those bottom-up pressures were already there, which was inevitable when you have this very young population, which is increasingly well educated, and of course, especially since 2009 with the social media revolution, online 24/7, as we've talked about before, and other people have talked about. Social media usage, internet penetration, and all these things are sky high here. So people, their awareness of all these, I can do this, I can do that, I want to do this, I want to do that, was all sort of there, but they sort of felt constrained because they couldn't. So what they were doing was that they were creating these types of things for themselves. So the vision responded to that. And of course, once that door opened, there was suddenly, it naturally, they sort of just went through it, as I said. So, I think, obviously, with the pandemic, obviously, had an impact on all of this and what we're now sort of seeing sort of post-pandemic. I think that the most important thing that has happened in terms of the vision is that it raised expectations, but I think, as we just mentioned before, it also has changed the way that people think about a lot of things. And it's broadened outlooks, it's broadened people's awareness of the opportunities and the choices that they might be able to make. Not that they necessarily are all going to do that, but I think that's happened, and I think that's it has had a fundamental impact on the kingdom and the way what you talk about with people, how people see their futures, how people see how they can contribute. It's made a massive impact, and I think it was very interesting last year when the Crown Prince gave his speech in Ramadan, when he was basically, sort of saying to, this very young population, we are making progress, there are bumps in the road, but, stay on board and what have you. And of course, what was also very interesting about that speech, that interview he gave on Rotana, was that actually he spent the majority of his time talking about issues in the realm of low politics, as we started off, talking about this 966, showing actually awareness on his part of how important those were. So, yeah, there's no doubt expectations were raised, but I think, that the journey since then, obviously we've seen changes happen.
But I also, I have two additional points. One is, I think until that moment, things had been building, but change had always been slow and incremental, and older generations were conscious and well aware of that. And as Mark describes it, the door was just suddenly flung open, and yes. It's like, wow. That's just like lifting the lid on something, and obviously expectations were going to be raised. And I think about this quite a lot. I've got a 19-year-old son. And his expectations at 19 are massive. He expects he's going to have the biggest house on earth. He's going to do this, this, and this. And that's no bad thing, actually. So if you have a youthful population that has expectations or ambitions, that's not, we shouldn't frown upon that. We can be a bit cynical and say, well, we don't think 2030 is going to hit all its marks. Obviously, there are 100 reasons why that's not the point. But we don't have to douse that kind of ambition or those expectations. Why would we want to curtail that? Particularly if these are young folks. Yes, they will be disappointed, as we all end up disappointed one way or another, because we can't have everything that we want. So I think sometimes we need to sort of bear that sort of in mind.
It is, if you ever did a case study on a paradigm shift, this would have to be in there. I just think because quite rapidly everyone's perception and framework changed, and this is one of the things I think we have difficulty with an American audience or a Western audience, is believing this is actually the case. And one of the things I think on the 966 I hope we're addressing. So the second thing that you mentioned was the introduction of Vision 2030. Was that it shone a light on the existing social contract. And I think this is especially true when later, Vision 2030 was 2016, but then the VAT, for example, was applied in 2018 and then increased in 2020. These are different social contracts, essentially the re-examining the nature of the relationship between state and society. Have you seen that?
I mean, yes, but I also think that I mean, obviously, we talk briefly in the book about the pandemic because the research for the book was done pre-pandemic, and it was based on the workshop that we had at Cambridge University in 2019. And the reason the book was delayed somewhat was because of the pandemic, because we actually had to send everything back to sort of, talk about the pandemic. We couldn't publish a book without mentioning the pandemic. So the relationship between state and society had been changing quite a bit, in that the sort of the legitimacy was increasingly based on government providing services and sort of security to sort of wider Saudi societies and everything. And then, of course, the pandemic really highlighted that. And the government's successful dealing with the pandemic in Saudi Arabia, which they did extremely well here. The tech, tawakkalna, all these things, which I think you've spoken about on other episodes and what have you. That really that reinforced that particular bond, whereby that it was the job of the government to look after society, if you like. And so that's something, and that's something that, again, I think was very positive. So we have definitely seen a shift in this relationship over the last couple of years. Neil, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'm actually already just sort of gaming this through in my mind, because we've been talking about sort of shifting and changing social contracts in the Gulf, for a good decade. Yeah. And where, states will provide those services, and there's a growing expectation that services should be provided. But at the same time, I mean, what we're seeing, and again, it's the environment in which the youth are operating, and it's kind of it's complicated. But there are those who seem to be taking on greater responsibility for themselves. Those who are those entrepreneurs are sort of moving into that space. So I think there's this idea that the state just kind of hands out, and we hear this constantly. The parents or the grandparents or even the great grandparents had a different relationship to the state, and that's undergone some changes. And I think maybe the expectations from the state are diminishing, and it doesn't necessarily operate at an individual's level, but some individuals or families are sort of feeling more independent or moving away from those constraints. But as you say, Mark, during the pandemic, I mean, the state was very present, right? Yeah. I mean, it was very much, we're here, we are your patron or whatever it might be, and we're going to manage and take care of this. So I don't see this as something being in sort of equilibrium or balance. It's something that's just undergoing a change. Trying to identify a spot where that is quite difficult. But it was quite. There was, for example, when during the very strict curfew here at in the first phase of the pandemic, there was resistance to some of the fact that it was so strict, and certainly when everybody was curfewed at home in Eid, for example, and nobody was allowed out of their houses and what have you, and it was very, very, very strict. But later on, of course, people realized that actually, thank goodness that happened, and we're very glad that actually the government did take this very strict line here. So yes, no, I mean, it's that's and that's obviously sort of all still playing out as it is all over the world as the pandemic ebbs.
Mark, I take issue with being Americans. Lucian and I, we can talk about resistance to government policy with regard to the pandemic. So maybe let's call the Saudi version a form of mild complaining. All right?
Yeah, mild complaining. Yes, mild.
We'll talk about resistance here in the US.
Mild. Yeah, when I say resistance, I mean
I
more.
understand.
Yeah.
No,
But-
and,
but I
and,
mean-
and your point is well made. When I talk about the social contract, people talk, when they hear that, they go, "Oh my goodness, radical things are happening." No, it's an evolution, and it's being embraced, I think, and obviously by the younger generation who are more comfortable with it, change. But it is an evolution. And the third, and if this sort of segues into the third point, and one of the things that you make is that this announcement implied and also encouraged or increased anticipation of greater government accountability, and increased participation in decision-making processes. I think clearly there seems to be greater government accountability, even within the government itself. There's the standards of accountability have been elevated considerably. But Lucia and I often remark on the fact that there are now avenues and means and platforms to comment on government performance for a lot of ministries. Is that correct?
Neil, do you want to come?
Yes, I mean, no, that is correct. And just reflecting on the conversation we were having with Hannah yesterday, absolutely, accountability as part of new governance, and that was very rarely there in any sort of formal or institutional way. There were means to maybe exercise some influence through Worcester, where you could seek alternative or informal pathways. But there are much more sort of formal ways, and that accountability sort of sits. We're not talking about high politics, political accountability, but we're talking about sort of low politics, service provision accountability.
Right.
So suddenly the citizen has more agency than they would have had in the past. There's more recourse, and that's empowerment within that lower sphere. And that means officials and those working in the bureaucracy or the administration can be held to account. And those that are held to account and have failed their duties are out of service. Hannah was saying yesterday, that is something that's really quite new. I mean, that's come with Vision 2030.
Yeah. I mean, and you look at this, you remarked when you were here a few months ago about the change in the standards of service that you saw here.
No, absolutely. There's been a big shift in that, certainly. Actually, just on another point, I mean, something that I find fascinating, and we were talking a little bit about it earlier, and it's kind of just remarking on that is, typically, say 10, 15 years ago when I was going to the kingdom, I would have my list of my 10 or 15 people that I would want to meet, and, have to wait for the last minute to actually get the okay to meet them, because aligning calendars is always complicated. I would very, very rarely bump into people in the street and have conversations. But when I wander in Riyadh now, I mean, quite a few times I've been approached by like young Saudis will say, "Are you a tourist? Are you lost? Do you want some help?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so that whole kind of space is just like it's really just opened up, and for very normal conversations which were often absent, and you can have a coffee with them and you can just talk about things. They're not going to answer questions on succession because they're not interested, and you wouldn't raise it. But if you want to talk about something else, absolutely. And I think that's generally sort of reflected in that space.
Yeah, no, that's completely normal now. Absolutely, that is, even away from this, the more affluent areas of Riyadh, should we say, where you would probably find more non-Saudi people, certainly Westerners. Even when you go out to the provinces and the smaller cities and everything, this is completely normal now.
So, gentlemen, this is, is there a takeaway from this book, which has come out this month, that you'd like to share with our listeners? Is there something, an overarching conclusion that you might share with us? Is there one? And it may not exist, and it may not have been the purpose, but I want to make sure we get to the gist of what you saw this book and the motivation for the book.
Neil, do you want to come in first?
So for me, I think the takeaway, and it seems a little bit sort of left of field, is that one question that I've had in my mind for the last 5 or 6 years when I've been going to Saudi quite a lot, and it's one that, when I sit in Chatham House, we chew over, are these reforms reversible? Are we going to reach a point where suddenly this is all taken away and it's like, no, we're going back to pre-2015? Now, my answer to that, as far as I can see from looking at Saudi and having worked on this book, is these changes, these reforms are irreversible. These are sort of deep-rooted changes that are taking place. This is part of a big paradigm shift, as you've called it, or transformation. It's not going to be linear. It's definitely going to be uneven. But I think it's happening at this kind of, it's not happening at the high level. It's happening at the low or the subterranean level. And I think that's important, because that's where the change really needs to take place. If it just simply happens at the top, then that's not going to percolate down. And I think sort of ownership of these processes, through sort of, lower politics, policy making and governance, is going to make these changes sustainable. So to me, that's the key takeaway. And the other point really is just what I said earlier, is that I think the country has changed to such an extent that we can no longer just content ourselves thinking, okay, who's going to be the next king or the next crown prince or the next deputy crown prince? I think we can now take a look at the kingdom at a much deeper level and try to understand more about society, some of those changes, and how decision making at the much more local level takes place. So that's it. So I think the lens is changing really, and we're able to look much deeper.
And when you have a much better educated society that is much better informed, that is much more aware of the socio-political, socio-economic issues, socio-cultural issues and what have you, then there are those conversations that are always happening, whether it's in the Majlis, whether it's in the Diwaniyah, whether it's in the Istiraha, and we know that Saudis love to sit around and talk about all of these different things. So we know that they're the discussions about how all of this post Vision 2030 in April 2016, how this is impacting on their lives, how it's impacting on the lives of their children and their grandchildren or what have you. All of this is part of the discourse. It's what everybody, people talk about normally and naturally, because it is such a huge thing that's happened. So I think, it's important to sort of to have, as Neil said, not just to look at that sort of very high level. We have to understand also about how these things play out at lower levels, and what the way people react to these things, how they see this impacting their lives, positively, negatively, whatever. Because again, it's also, Saudi Arabia is I've said this so many times, Saudi Arabia is a huge country. It's not homogenous. These things are interpreted differently in different parts of the kingdom. Employment might be important right across the kingdom, but the levels of that importance or specific areas of that importance can differ depending on where you are and who you're talking to. But what we do know is that these conversations are happening all the time, and it's important for us to try and not just understand this, but also to document this. I had a visit from a Saudi academic from Qasim this morning in my office, and we were talking exactly about this, about how very important it is to document what's happening, or what has happened since the launch of the vision and before, obviously, but to keep documenting it so that there is a historical record.
Governance and Domestic Policymaking in Saudi Arabia, Transforming Society, Economics, Politics, and Culture is the book. Dr. Mark Thompson, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Socioeconomics Program at the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, and Dr. Neil Quilliam, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you
That's
so much.
applause, gentlemen.
Well done.
And to you too, guys.
I'll wear a
Fascinating.
tie next time. I'll wear a tie next time.
No. Let Neil be our show, our showpiece right here. We're all, I think we're all better off for it.
That was our awesome discussion with Dr. Mark Thompson and Dr. Neil Quilliam. The book is coming out in just a week on Amazon. It is available on Kindle now. Governance and Domestic Policymaking in Saudi Arabia, Transforming Society, Economics, Politics, and Culture. Richard, well done. That was excellent.
That was great. I should note it is out on Kindle, and it's not hyper expensive. So many of these academic, it's not academic, but they get into the academic arena, and the hardbacks are triple digits. So, but it's available on Kindle for $17. And it's worth it. It's a really good read, and they're doing groundbreaking work that nobody else is doing. If you want to know about Saudi Arabia at the socioeconomic level and what factors are in play, these two are doing tremendous work.
Dr. Mark also talked about his entrance into Islam, and he just completed his first Umrah and also got his first Umrah flu, which was great. But yes, thank you to them very much for joining us. Richard, let's get to Yalla.
Saudi in a minute.
Yalla. One day we won't laugh at it, and then we'll just stop doing it. But for now,
no, I think we should retire. Number one, Saudi GDP grows 9.9% in Q1, beating flash estimates. Saudi Arabia's gross domestic product grew 9.9% in the first quarter, the fastest in a decade, and more than a flash estimate last month of 9.6%. Official data showed on Tuesday, according to Reuters. It was the fastest expansion since the third quarter of 2011, with the increase in oil production a key factor, said Monica Malik, chief economist at Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank.
Yeah, I mean, the Saudi economy is red hot right now. The General Authority for Statistics said this growth is due to the high increase in oil activities by 20.3%, which makes sense. Oil prices are up. Crude, petroleum, and natural gas activities were the highest contributor to GDP at 32.4%. But the study also said that all economic activities recorded positive annual growth rates in the first quarter of this year. So the economy, both the oil and non-oil economy, is just humming along right now. And Richard, this was sort of as predicted by economists that we talked about at the end of last year. Just the Saudi economy is in a really good spot right now.
The World Bank just came out with a global report and have readjusted every region across the globe down in terms of expected growth, except for the Middle East, primarily the oil-producing states, and Sub-Saharan Africa, which is up by 0.1%. But really, the Middle East and specifically with the engine of the oil-producing Gulf states in Iraq, and they are expanding while the rest of the globe is not contracting, but their projections are being readjusted downwards. And they're really doing well. Now, I thought this was interesting because, and I think it's an interesting point, and by comparison, it occurred to me that third quarter of 2011, this is the fastest expansion since the third quarter of 2011, was Saudi's response to the Arab Spring. And in fact, in February 2011, King Abdullah returned from a 3-month stay in Morocco after he had surgery in the US. And so that's February 2011. The Arab Spring, quote unquote, had really started early that year, January. And you saw, over the course of the Arab Spring, 5 governments topple. You saw Libya, Yemen, Tunisia, Egypt, and there's I think there's a fifth. But so it was a fraught time. And the response was, as King Abdullah came back and he unveiled $37 billion worth of benefits for Saudis. So, that was unveiled in February. So that's going to come out in that third quarter. So this is kind of what we've talked about in the past. This kind of input, jolt to an economy, $37 billion, is sort of a transitory one. It's not, it's not infrastructure or that sort of thing. And that's different from what we're seeing now, which is a more fundamental change. Obviously, there's this, we're not going to have 9.9% growth every quarter. There's a lot of this is commodity based in oil. But the point being, non-oil economy, for example, rose 3.7% from the previous from this quarter. So I just thought it was interesting juxtaposing it with that third quarter of 2011, which is what they're benchmarking it against. Entirely different bounce to the economy. Artificial, you might say, a $37 billion infusion, one-time infusion. I think the Saudi economy is looking really healthy and positive right now.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why tuning into the 966 is a really good idea if you want to understand what's going on in Saudi Arabia beyond the headlines, because that was fantastic, Mr. Wilson, giving that context onto 2011 and why there was that huge bump. And that was the last time that they saw that. That was really, really fantastic. Well done, sir. Excellent.
Thank you.
We do get beyond the headline here on the 966, and a quick reminder to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. It's all Gucci. Wherever you want to get us, we'll be there. Yellow number 2, President Biden's meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman pushed back to July. A meeting between President Joe Biden and Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is now expected to happen next month in July, according to an administration official. CNN reported earlier this week that Biden and the Crown Prince were planning to meet at the end of June as part of a broader summit in the GCC, which Saudi Arabia currently presides over, but it looks like it's been pushed. I should note really quickly, the White House denied that it was pushed. The White House just said that it had been rescheduled. It was never set in stone. But interesting. We do hope to see this happen.
Yeah, I guess the president is going later this month to Germany and Spain for G7 and NATO summits. It makes sense to separate. I'm actually kind of pleased it is. It gives a little more time for critics to get acclimated to it. They can vent, get their points across, begin to reconcile the fact that it's going to happen. It gives them more time to sort out that this is, Saudi and U.S. planning, agencies for this visit to get their ducks in a row, make sure they're going whatever communique they're going to come out with is in sync and sort of manage expectations. So I don't think this is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. It gives them a little more time to get ready. I understand that President Biden was ready to shake MBS's hand, Mohammed bin Salman's hand, in October at the G20 meeting, and MBS didn't attend that meeting. So this is something that's been coming, and I think people understood it. But it's a timely thing for the U.S.-Saudi relationship, and to getting it back on a more even keel.
Plus, Germany and Spain are a little bit nicer to visit right now in the summer than Saudi Arabia, which is starting to get pretty hot.
July it'll be smoking.
July it'll be even hotter. So he's just delaying the pain a little bit. Very, very interesting. We will be, of course, following this very closely here on the 966, but will be interesting. I think that there will be some shock from the American left and the Democrats when there is the handshake or whatever photo comes out, whatever is presented as media of Saudi Arabia, President Biden and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And then I think there will be a period where there's a little bit of discussion about it, and then it'll be over and people will move on, such as the way things are now. And I think it's important that Biden does this. So
will there be a picture of it?
That's a good question. The other question is who will be receiving President Biden at the airport, as we've discussed. That's always a very interesting.
It'll be King Salman. I mean, if he's healthy, it'll be King Salman. I mean, it should be, and with MBS, it should be the whole group. And I assume that's where the handshake will take. The handshake is obviously just pro forma at this point. But let's get it done with, and I'm glad it's coming off. Number 3, Saudi Wealth Fund's $3 billion Jordan unit aims to ramp up deals. The Saudi Jordanian Investment Fund, controlled by Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, is backing the development of a $400 million hospital in Amman as it looks to ramp up spending over the next few years. The fund, which has committed capital of $3 billion, will be the only equity investor in a new 300-bed hospital in Jordan in partnership with California's UCLA Health and the University College of London's Medical School.
Interesting uptick in Saudi-Jordan relations of late. Richard, this sort of started in April when Saudi Arabia sent $50 million to Jordan to help the government shore up its budget. It was also reported this week that Saudi Arabia's PIF will buy a 23.97% stake in Capital Bank Group, one of the largest banking groups in the region based in Jordan. That report said that Saudi Arabia will invest $185 million in the stake. Very interesting. They're obviously neighbors, strong relations, both monarchies. But I think Saudi Arabia sees a lot of opportunity in a country that is struggling economically, a sort of buy low situation.
Well, it is interesting, and it's interesting. You know, it's nice that to be working with an American and a British entities on partnering on this. I guess the investment is expected to create more than 5,000 jobs. The fund is a little slow out of the gate, but is according to the CEO, Omar Al-Weir, is looking to invest in infrastructure projects, healthcare, tourism, and just provide growth capital. And I guess that 50 million you mentioned is part of a larger 2.5 billion aid package that includes money from the UAE and Kuwait. I thought this was interesting. Ali Shahabi, who we know, and is author and commentator, and has a lot of good insights. This is what he tweeted about this investment. This new strategy of hashtag Saudi investing in Jordan, Egypt, etc., is much smarter than the old style of foreign aid in blank checks. It helps these countries by injecting foreign exchange, grows the economy, and also gives the Saudi people a long-term return on their money. It also avoids the leakages in corruption, in parentheses, that inevitably happens when a blank check is given. So I just thought that was an interesting take on this particular story, and I agree with it. This is a good way to invest and engage and help.
Yeah, there's a little bit more of a responsible kind of sheen on this versus here is the blank check.
Well, yeah, the blank check is generated out of goodwill, but as we know, it can be mishandled at the receiving country.
Mm-hmm. Jordan also has territory, a huge border with Saudi Arabia, but also is got a little bit of peace, the Gulf of Aqaba. I mean, they're neighbors. And so Jordan's having a healthy economy and a strong country in Jordan is good for Saudi Arabia. I think the Saudis are now also competing a little closer with Jordan because they now have their own version of Petra in Al Ola. Helping out your neighbor, that's always a good thing.
Absolutely.
Number 4, I think. Number four. Yeah. Okay, great. Saudi Arabia plans to spend $1 billion a year, discovering treatments to slow aging. The Saudi royal family has started a not-for-profit organization called the Hevolution Foundation with an H that plans to spend up to $1 billion a year of its oil wealth supporting basic research on the biology of aging and finding ways to extend the number of years people live in good health, a concept known as, quote, health span.
Hurry up.
They should have done this 15 years ago.
Yeah, come on. What does this have to do with me? It's not in time.
They could have preempted the Instagram filter. Totally. Just everybody's the same age.
Hey, I thought my one big thing was global media perceptions and reporting on Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia. What would it be if Saudi Arabia had help fund a breakthrough on aging? So, and to put this in perspective, this is $1 billion a year, according to their commitment. But to put this in perspective, the NIH, U.S. National Institutes of Health, puts about $300 million a year into the basic biology of aging research. So that's $300 million. And most of that is on Alzheimer's, which so far to date hasn't yielded a lot. In the National Institute of Aging, only about $5 million a year is put into interventions, testing, and that sort of thing. So it would be extraordinary. First of all, this is a boatload of money that they're committing to it, and significantly more than this being done in the U.S. So it would be quite remarkable if they had a a breakthrough. And I guess the fund is being managed by Mahmoud Khan, who's former Mayo Clinic endocrinologist and one-time chief scientist at PepsiCo. He's a CEO, started in 2020. His quote, "Our primary goal is to extend the period of a healthy lifespan. There is not a bigger medical problem on the planet than this one," unquote.
It's interesting that this is a not-for-profit, because it seems like it would be a good for-profit investment, a good for-profit company, because the technology and the developments that you create could be patented and sold, repackaged. But it's not. It's a not-for-profit. So it's interesting to see what they come up with, how they invest this money. Very interesting.
I guess they're going to give grants for basic scientific research, and also to support drug studies, including trials of, quote, treatments that are patent expired or never got commercialized, unquote. So you talk about being a nonprofit, so it can go into the new nonprofit city. But let's say they get a breakthrough. How valuable is that goodwill?
Mm-hmm. Quite valuable.
Extraordinary.
Plus, if you have an extra $1 billion a year sitting around, we all suffer from the problem of aging. It's one thing that does unite us all. So not a bad use of it. So thanks in advance to anything they discover or fund that helps me not look older.
Yeah, exactly. And just to improve, I'm in need of it. What number are we on? Number 5.
I think we're at number 5. Yeah.
Saudi delegations to visit U.S. to improve economic ties. This comes, quote, according to Reuters, at a time when Riyadh and Washington are intensifying their efforts to repair their tense relations with the aim of paving the way for U.S. President Joe Biden's visit, unquote. The first delegation expected to visit Washington on June 15th, headed by Saudi Commerce Minister Majid bin Abdullah al-Qasabi, while the second delegation, headed by Investment Minister Khalid al-Fallah, intends to visit the United States by the end of the month.
Really good to see from the U.S.-Saudi relations standpoint. Richard, as you know very well, Dr. Majid al-Qasabi is the second hardest working man in Saudi Arabia behind MBS. He's held several ministerial positions, sometimes all at the same time. He's a machine. He's a machine. This is really good. And of course, Khalid al-Fallah, who was once Minister of Petroleum, is now Minister of Investment, another high profile ministerial rank position. Great that they're coming to the United States. The 2 delegations are expected to include dozens of government officials and directors of Saudi companies who will discuss concluding agreements in a number of sectors, such as transportation, logistics, and renewable energy. This is just like what we talk about all the time, Richard. The below the handshake photograph, welcoming at the airport. There is so much going on between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia in these sectors, in defense, beyond that, and now sports. This is really good to see. I mean, this is the type of stuff that really matters in a G2G, B2B relationship between 2 countries.
Absolutely. I mean, the only really official interaction that has been reported on of late is Khalid bin Salman, the Minister of Defense, brother of MBS, son of King Salman, who came last year and is just here recently. So these are the first sort of additional delegations on top of that, and you could not send better representatives. I mean, Majid al-Qasabi is extraordinarily capable, tremendous representative, and they're talking about commercial and commerce and investment. Khalid al-Fallah, just a extremely seasoned and well-known Saudi professional executive, and been former minister of energy, former head of Saudi Aramco. I mean, if as you begin to rebuild this relationship and rebuild the networks and the habits of these interactions, these 2 gentlemen are just you couldn't pick anyone better. And you'll have U.S. ambassador to the U.S. Princess Rima bint Bandar, involved in all of these. So this is really putting a strong foot forward on issues, commerce and investment, that are meaningful, and it's a good way to start rebuilding things.
And Saudi Arabia has really tried to recalibrate their approach to attracting foreign investment. And, they've had SAGIA, they've had different organizations try to really make a huge change in how much money is being invested into Saudi Arabia, which is obviously key for Vision 2030. And I think they have it right with Khalid Al-Fallah heading the investment minister. They've got a great team over there working on it. So this should be good. I bet they are busy here in the United States, so it'll be nice to see this take place, especially in advance of the Biden visit, as we discussed. Yellow number 6, Saudi Arabia condemns Indian officials' comments insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Saudi Arabia condemned and denounced statements by the spokeswoman of India's ruling BJP party, which constituted an insult to the Prophet Muhammad, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Sunday.
This has become a big thing, and it is a big thing. Mm-hmm. Our friend Khalid Al-Mainu, who's a renowned journalist, pays close attention to treatment of Muslims in India and in Asia, and he sent me something early on this. I think there's been a frustration, I think, in the Gulf with President Modi's overlooking intolerance, and repression and attacks on Muslim communities, and this sort of come to fruition here, where this is really has drawn a strong response. And I think India initially wanted to sort of dismiss it, but they couldn't, because at least 5 Arab nations have lodged official protests. Pakistan and Afghanistan also reacted. Organization of Islamic Cooperation has come out. But here's the thing. India can't foul us up. I mean, it has 3.4 million Indians working in the UAE, 2.6 million in Saudi, 1 million in Kuwait, and across the GCC, a total of 7.6 million. Over a quarter of Indians working overseas are in GCC countries, and trade with the GCC states was $90 billion in 2020 and 2021. I mean, so this is once India realized that this was a real issue and felt strongly by these GCC states, they immediately sacked the spokeswoman and also another member of the party. And I think they're trying to make amends. We'll see how successful they are.
I didn't see her comments. I was unable to find what she said. Apparently she said something insulting twice. It's just a very, very immature and kind of foolish move to be a spokesperson and not know how sensitive this is. And yeah. And I think what's annoying to members of the Gulf community and the Muslim community is this is not these kind of comments have been tolerated for some time, and they there's felt that it's led to some very some attacks on Muslim mosques and any number of things that are not acceptable to Muslims across the globe, and particularly obviously in the GCC, who are responding here. Mm-hmm. Well, Richard, on that note, by the way, sorry. No, please. I should add, there are 200 million Muslims in India. Obviously, there's much more Hindus, but I mean, that's the largest population of Muslims outside of Pakistan and Indonesia in the world. Mm-hmm. So it's a consequential community, and combined with the trade and that sort of thing, and the expatriate labor that derives all sorts of remittances to India. These are important relationships that India has to tend to. Mm-hmm. Of course, India is a buyer of Saudi crude, is a processor of Saudi crude. I mean, it is an important relationship for both Saudi Arabia and India. But yeah, I mean, this is, can't have this, and you got to contain this. You've got to make sure it doesn't happen again. And India would have seen how effective the unofficial boycott of of Turkey was in 2020. It was a significant dent into that trade relationship between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's going to get there, India, but it's just, this was a major misstep on the part of the spokeswoman and other members of the BJP. Mm-hmm. I think that just about does it, Mr. Wilson. We'll end on that very positive note. Usually we end on a positive note, and it just didn't happen this week, probably because we spent half the episode talking about golf. But Just a really good episode, Richard. And again, for all of our listeners and viewers, you can check all of these out as segments on YouTube. If you want to just listen to one part of the episode or just the interviews, we have them all there broken out. Of course, you get the whole lamb, as we say it, as a podcast where a lot of our listeners come from. But Richard, just a great episode. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Despite the spot of bother at the beginning.
The spot of bother.
Outstanding.
See you next week.
See you next week. Thank you, Lucian.
Thank you.